From Resilient Partners, this is the Resilient Insights Podcast. Every episode offers in-depth insights on the key debates and conversations shaping Washington and the world. From policy to leadership to the lighter side of life, we're your source for thoughtful discussions. So get ready to be informed, inspired, and engaged. Go. Welcome to the Resilient Insights Podcast. I'm your guide on this journey, Joshua Baca, walking you through the intricate world of public policy, leadership, and the lighter side of life. Today, we're going to talk about the lighter side of life and dive deep into America's pastime with baseball guru Tim Shovers. Tim, welcome to the Resilient Insights Podcast. How you doing today?
Great, Joshua. Thank you so much for having me on. Thrilled to be here.
What makes you a baseball guru? How are you involved in podcasting and intersecting that world with baseball? Why don't you tell the listeners just a little bit more about yourself?
Caught the baseball bug as a kid. I grew up in Atlanta in the 90s when the Braves had an epic run. So literally every single year of my childhood, the Braves won the division. The first time in October came where I didn't have a team to root for was my junior year of college. And then I moved here. And right when I moved here was when Steven Strasburg joined the Nats, and they went from kind of a forgettable team, but all of a sudden something to watch for. And I was working in sports radio. My first job came right as they won the division for the first time in 2012. And I was covering the team in 2019. And then we all know how that magically ended up. And all that experience led me to go out on my own and start my own baseball podcast company, which I did a few years ago. And here we are entering season 4, still going strong. Also, my father is a huge baseball fan. He saw the Milwaukee Braves win the World Series when he was 10 years old, growing up in Wisconsin. So it's just, father-sons, there's a big connection in baseball, and certainly my household is no different. And it's just an inescapable part of my life.
That's awesome. Tell us a little bit about the podcast you're running today.
Nats Chat podcast is, as I said, entering year 4, hosted by Al Galdi and Mark Zuckerman. Al and I worked together for years at ESPN 980, a sports radio station in D.C. Mark has been covering the Nats since the 2005 season, and we're basically one-of-a-kind podcast. We record after every single game, so 162 podcasts. It's as exhausting as you would think it is. And also this year, I launched a Braves podcast called 755 Forever with sort of the Mark equivalent in Atlanta. His name's David O'Brien. He's covered the team for a long time, and also Eric O'Flaherty, a relief pitcher. That's going to be after every single series. But I've always believed that baseball has been undercovered, especially in the DC market. If you listen to sports radio, it's all about football, pretty much 12 months a year. And so Nats Chat was created to sort of fill that void for people who love the Nats but don't care about the Commanders.
Well, first off, let me give you a sincere thank you for that, because I love sports talk radio. But if I have to listen one more time to whether the Commanders are drafting Drake May or Jaden Daniels at number 2, I might steer my car off the road.
You're the target audience, right? You like the Nats and you're Alphic in DC, but you don't care about Drake May. And as you said, that's the nonstop chatter until the draft night.
How hard is it to record a podcast after every single baseball game during a baseball season?
It gets exhausting. The hardest part is at the weekends, there's no break whatsoever, even with All-Star. The All-Star break is Monday through Thursday, so it's Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday for 26, 27-ish consecutive weekends. That gets tiring. There are a few off days here and there. Could use a few more. Day games are a big help, but no, it's something in the back of my head that has to be dealt with every single day. So it's not exactly working in the coal mines, but by August and September, looking forward to the end of the season for sure.
I can't thank you guys enough for doing that podcast. Every morning when I wake up to get my gym routine going, when that podcast is not in my feed in the morning, it's like I'm lost in baseball season. So normally that only occurs when there's a doubleheader, the game has been canceled, and you guys had to consolidate a few episodes. But by and large, you guys do a really, really nice job in covering the Nats. So one of the things I wanted to get into, Tim, is on the Resilient Insights podcast, we talk a lot about resilience. It's the founding principle of my company, Resilient Partners, where we're helping clients navigate the world of government affairs and strategic communications and reputation management, but it's also a guiding principle for life. And when I think about baseball, I think of baseball as sort of the ultimate sport of resilience. You guys cover it. You probably know it more intimately than anybody. 162 games, um, hundreds of at bats every year, thousands of pitches thrown. Why do you think baseball is the ultimate sport of resilience?
I think when you look at, let's say, the batting champion at the end of the season, who usually hits around 330, let's say 333, well, that means that 2 out of every 3 times they're not getting a hit. So if you're a Hall of Famer, you're failing at the plate twice as much as you're succeeding. And these are the great ones. So just imagine if you're a mediocre hitter, you're getting on 1 out of every 4 times or 1 out of every 5 times. And with the resiliency, as I talked about earlier with the no weekend break, I mean, it is an every single day thing. And the only thing that's forgiving about it is a random off day or rain. So that alone, it's a sport of inherent failure. Failure far outweighs the success. And so you do need to be resilient in order to be successful because you're going to come up short way more often than you come through.
You know, you cover the players a lot closer than I do. Obviously, you have intimate interactions with them. How do you think players navigate this?
Well, because baseball season is so long, it requires so much continuity. I think these players are just so used to it. They've been playing every single day for 6, 7, 8 months at a time since they were really in middle school. If you look at the travel schedule now, it's very intense, high level high school baseball. Summer leagues are always in play, especially in college. So I think that's just sort of what's for many people, life is sitting in traffic an hour every morning and an hour every single afternoon. That's sort of what it's like for a baseball player. They really don't know what life is like otherwise.
How do players manage their mental health with all of the distraction in the world today, the grind? Do you see anything unique happening in baseball that our players are embracing as a means to balance the mental side and the physical side here?
Yeah, it's a good question. Mental health has become, just like in life, even more of an issue within sports. I still think baseball has a little bit of ways to go with that. I do know a lot of players meditate or do other means. I'm sure a lot of guys are in therapy. They have not told me that personally, but one thing I think in the past few years as mental health awareness is on the rise, I think that more and more players should get a true day off. Like if you get a day off in baseball, you sit on the bench and maybe you get called up for a late at bat in the ninth inning. I could see more and more managers giving players the actual day off, sit and watch on their couch. That would be a bit of an extreme thing, I think, for baseball thinking. It's an owner, I'm giving this guy a paycheck to sit at home, which also mirrors how business goes in this country. But I do think that there's a lot of room for growth in that area.
Let's talk a little bit about analytics and resilience. You know, the baseball game has become so analytical driven. OPS plus and all of these metrics that monitor the game of baseball and how good players are playing. How do players use analytics today to further and be more resilient in the sport of baseball? What do analytics tell them about how they can fail less, if that's the right way to say it, based upon your comments a few minutes ago?
Well, in terms of less failure, let's look at it from a pitching standpoint. The scouting reports that the pitchers are given are extremely detailed and extremely broken down from their in-house analytics department to the point where they know a guy's batting average, late in the count, with a low in the zone on off-speed pitches or sliders. So they know every single hitter's exact weakness and weak points, which leads to success on their end. Meanwhile, if you look at conversely with hitters, they have more and more info of pitchers' tendencies and how to prepare. And this guy usually throws his fastballs maybe only early in the count, or he only throws his curveballs when he has 2 strikes and he's ahead in the count. So it cuts both directions. But I do believe, Joshua, that there probably has to be paralysis by analysis at some point. I mean, all that data in your head in between pitches. And this has led to part of some of the rule changes that came along with the pitch clock was cutting down on the amount of pitcher and catcher meetings in between bats or in between pitches. It's now limited to how many you can do that per game. A lot of that came from the increase in analytics where you saw more and more pitchers and catchers calling time to convene because they had so much data to go through in between pitches. So with that, I think analytics has been used a little bit less, but still there's a mountain of it, an avalanche of it every single game, every single at bat.
You know, I have this vision of this analytics report being a complex one pager with a lot of data and information. How do players process that? And in the midst of a high leverage, high situation game with new rules where you can't necessarily walk up to the mound? Is it just go time at some point in baseball, to your point about paralysis by analysis?
I think especially starting with the pitch clock that was instituted last year that sped up games and really cut it down, I think, by a half hour per day, which was extremely welcome as a media member of the media. I do think that now that pitchers have less time to go, I think that there is less of that. And I imagine that there's more homework, if you will, before the games because of that. And if you look at the Nats specifically, they hired Sean Doolittle to be a pitching strategist. And this happened a couple months ago in January. And from what I've heard from people covering the team down in Florida, this is not a ceremonial job. He is really diving into the numbers, and he's working as a liaison between the analytics guys who might be, a lot of Ivy Leaguers that really didn't play the sport. And he is sort of taking the information being given from the analytics guys and then talking to the pitchers. So you've seen an evolution of that in terms of sophistication with that now analytics have reached a point where you have, new middlemen and new messengers. Not that middlemen will be probably the wrong way to say for Sean Doolittle, but I can't think of a better term right now. So all of that is evolving with the speed of the game that has picked up the last year.
So I assume you're a big fan of the pitch clock.
I went to a spring training game last year, and it was love at first sight. There were a lot of games, 4-2, the most forgettable games you've ever seen in the last few years. There were 4 hours, 3 hours and 45 minutes, and it had become, frankly, unacceptable. And so not just for me selfishly, but it was a necessity for the sport, and I'm very thankful that it was instituted.
I have one regret in life when it comes to baseball was in 2019 when the Nats made the epic comeback against the Mets in September where they were down 7-8 runs and Suzuki hit the walk-off. To me, that was an example of where the pitch clock would have probably helped me. I mean, that game was so long that I made the mistake of leaving at the top of the 9th inning. I was like, this game is over. I had already been at the ballpark in traffic for well over 4 hours. And I remember getting home that night, and my wife said, what an amazing game. I couldn't get over it. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I pull out my phone, and I'm like, I missed the greatest comeback in Nats history. And I thought it was at that moment where I was like, this team's going really far all the way. So,
yeah. Well, Charlie Slows and Dave Jaguar, when they say he blew it that great, they were talking about you. Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. I mean, that's growing up. I can't tell you how many times my dad and I would go to a game, and then we'd leave early because he wanted to beat traffic, and then there'd be a walk-off. So, yeah, that story happens all the time. And with the pitch clock, I think it is really important if you want to maintain, a younger generation's interest in the sport, ending the games a half hour earlier. I think it's, essential.
Let's talk a little bit about the history of baseball. When you think of the history of baseball, who is the baseball player of resilience that comes to mind to you?
Oh, that's a great question. It could go in so many different directions on this one. I mean, there's one regard, Cal Ripken, with the streak, playing over 2,632 consecutive games. And if you break that down, it's really unfathomable. It was like 15, 16 years of never missing a game. And for a large part of that, never missing an inning. That would be one. You see guys like Daniel Barnes, for instance, who was a star pitcher at University of North Carolina, was a first-round draft choice, pitched for a while in the major leagues, retires. It looked like he was done. And then I think 7 years later, comes back in his late 30s and totally remade himself and was a new pitcher and made the All-Star team. I mean, what resiliency there? I mean, he left the sport and came back to it. There's so many guys, or anyone that really comes back for Tommy John surgery. That's missing a year plus. That's really a 15-month injury. It used to be almost a 2-year injury the guys had to come from. And you talk about guys who have to remake their pitching motion. Imagine at your job, whatever you do, if you have to change the basic way you do your job day in and day out. So I think all of those would be good examples.
Let's talk about the state of baseball in our youth today. I know before we were recording, I was talking about, my daughter's 5. We're signing her up for soccer, and she's really excited about it. It seems that the barrier of entry for some sports are easier than others. Where do you think baseball falls on this?
Well, youth baseball is in an interesting spot. Barrier to entry, yes, it's an expensive sport. It really typically thrives mostly in high income areas, which is unfortunate. It'd be better, if it could be more like basketball where it's sort of works in all areas of socioeconomic divisions. But one thing I do think has helped baseball is CTE awareness with football. Youth participation in football has gone down, and I do think that has led to more players in baseball and also soccer as well. One thing that I think doesn't get realized, especially up in the I-95 bubble in the Northeast, is that youth baseball in the South is alive and well and better than it's ever been. And that's reflected in most players that make the major leagues come from the southeastern part of the United States. So I don't have the numbers offhand as well, but I imagine out west, the youth baseball participation has been on the rise because football has dramatically fallen in the past decade, really tied to CTE.
What are some solutions or things of encouragement that we could do to get more youth involved in baseball?
Well,
The Nats Academy is a really good example of that, right?
yeah, the Nats Academy is really good. It's in Southeast DC. There's an RBI league. I'm forgetting what the acronym stands for right now, but basically to bring baseball into inner cities and lower income areas. It's a tough climb though, right? Especially now, I would say something that makes it even harder is with NIL money in college sports, where more college basketball and college football players are going to get immediate payouts. So that also hurts baseball. But then again, if you play high level baseball, especially the SEC, you could make money in college. So that cuts in both directions. So the answer, Joshua, it is being addressed. Could it get better? Probably. But 30 years ago, I don't even think this is remotely on baseball's radar. This has more been something of this century.
You're the baseball guru. You get a magic wand. If you could do a few things to increase the participation in youth baseball, what would Tim Shovers do?
Well, one thing I would do is I would really cut down on summer leagues. I think it's bad for players long term. You look at all the pitching injuries that happen. There's a lot of reasons why, and throwing the ball 99 miles per hour is not natural. But what happens with these summer leagues at the youth level is that's so much wear and tear on these players' arms. And another reason is I don't think the summer leagues are being made for their benefit. I think it's for people to make their own private money, and obviously all these summer leagues, whoever's running it's getting a paycheck. And I would prefer to see that more policed because that does have an effect longer term. And I do think that if we were to cut down on the amount of games that high level players are playing in 7th through 12th grade, I do think, I'm not a doctor, but my hunch is we would have fewer pitcher injuries as these players reach the majors.
It seems also from a girl dad perspective that like college softball is really thriving right now. Do you agree with that?
Definitely. I think that the main reason with that is Big Ten Network, SEC Network, ACC Network. These games are on television. When I graduated from University of Wisconsin in 2008, I called women's softball for a few years. This is the beginning of the Big Ten, but I had never watched a game of college softball in my life before then. But I think that it's definitely getting more and more attention. One thing that's good about it that works well is that, it's in May and June when the tournament is, kind of a slower time on the sports calendar. And then I mentioned NIL earlier. Now they're, especially with the really, really, really good programs such as Texas or Oklahoma, who's become dominant recently, schools like that, there's money to be made. If you're a top level college softball pitcher, you can make a pretty decent number as a freshman or sophomore in college. So I actually think that you talk about girl dad, I think there's more and more to come with that. I think the best years of college softball are ahead of us.
That's awesome. I couldn't resist the question here. NIL and baseball, do you think with the NIL now in college sports that more players will be playing college baseball and softball, particularly college baseball, as opposed to going pro right after high school?
I do, because there'll be money thrown at them right away. And if you look at it, unless you're a first round draft pick, the money for draft picks coming out of high school for minor leagues could be smaller than you maybe would guess. So I think absolutely it will work in that favor, which is better for the player. What it's traditionally been is if you're drafted out of high school, you can either go to college, but if you go to college, you have to commit for 3 years or go straight to the minor leagues. That is one heck of a decision to have to make at 18 years old. That's a lot to weigh. And I don't know if most people, I certainly wouldn't have been mature enough to make a decision like that.
I'm still not mature enough to make that decision.
Wait, imagine if you make that decision now. All right, you have, and then also you factor in the college experience, the college degree, all of those things. So I think that college baseball really is going to benefit from that.
I thought last season's college baseball was just one of the more exciting seasons I've seen in quite some time. So many players went early in the draft out of college. I just think there's a degree of maturity, and they've played the game a little bit longer. They're a little bit more MLB ready. So maybe that's a great transition into the funnest part of this conversation, this upcoming baseball season. I'll start off with a somewhat Nats-related question. Is Wyatt Langford going to be the Rookie of the Year, and did the Nats draft the wrong guy?
I know Wyatt Langford's on your radar. I know he's having a really, really hot start, and I know Dylan Cruz struggled last year in Double-A. But no, I stand by him. I think the Nats made the right decision drafting Dylan Cruz. Best of luck to Wyatt Langford. I know he'll probably be up earlier than Cruz. But one thing to keep in mind with Cruz is that he had a really exhausting run last year. Playing for, I know Wyatt Langford also made the College World Series, but Cruz played all season in the SEC. Then he made the run to national championship, and then didn't get much of a break. Tore it up in Low A, and then struggled a little bit in Double A. But that's quite an increase of tough pitching that he had to face. So no, I still think Cruz was the right pick. But man, Wyatt Langford is making it a little tougher to stand by that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the state of MLB right now. Who are your favorites this year? Do the Braves topple the Dodgers? Are the Dodgers going to win 120 games? Where do you see the big picture of baseball this year?
I think the Braves are the team to beat. They're really loaded. They have a fierce competition for the fifth starter. They have probably like 8 guys that could start, and then their offense is completely loaded. The Dodgers, of course, also, ridiculously stacked as well. One thing to keep in mind, Shohei Ohtani is not pitching this year, because he had Tommy John surgery. So he's just a hitter this year. So they're not getting the two-way talents from him. But really, Joshua, and I hate that this is my answer, because of the new playoff format that has flaws for days, October now is a completely separate season. And to say, I'm confident that the Braves and Dodgers are going to win 100 games, barring extreme injuries or something going wrong. But come the playoffs, look at last year. There's our Diamondbacks. They won 84 games and got in. Based upon what we see with this new format, I don't think it was that much of a fluke, really. It's really about how your pitching staff is on October 1, not what happened for the preceding 6 months. So if I had to bet on it, I'd pick the Braves. In the other side, with the American League, Garrett Cole, right now we're hearing a month that he's going to be out. I have a feeling that could stretch to more and more. The Yankees, though, are due. They got a really good squad, but it is hard to pick against Houston. I mean, Houston right now is just so loaded. So if I had to guess, I think we'll have a rematch of the World Series that we had 3 years ago, which would be Braves and Astros. And so right now I'll pick the Braves.
Give me a sleeper team. Who's the Arizona Diamondbacks of this season?
Well, there's optimism in Pittsburgh this year with the Pittsburgh Pirates, to the point where they, at the end of the year, we're talking already ready for next year. One guy to keep on your radar is O'Neal Cruz. He's a really tall shortstop. If you see him in person, he's really fun to see. But it's been a while since Pittsburgh has been in the mix, and I'm pulling for them because it's a historical fan base that has had very few seasons to cheer for. So I'm pulling for my guys up in Pittsburgh.
And the best baseball stadium in all of MLB, one of the top 5 baseball stadiums?
Oh, it's certainly top 5. Yeah. Wrigley and Fenway is its own thing. So, do PNC versus Camden Yards. I've not been to a game, but I've walked into San Francisco Stadium before. Yeah, I'll go Pittsburgh on the ladder. That's a tough scene to beat.
What about our friends up north, 95, Baltimore? What do you think about all the hype, all the prospects? You think they got it? I think they got Corbin Burns traded from Milwaukee. Did I get that right? What are your thoughts about the Baltimore Orioles?
Yeah, I should have mentioned them more in the American League. I mean, they were in a great spot. Their plan was to tear down and rebuild the farm system, and that has paid off after years and years of really being horrible product on the baseball field. But yeah, adding Corbin Burns makes them even stronger. They won 100 games last year. Now that, sort of say that, probably should, especially with the Garrett Cole injury with New York, probably should make them the AL East favorites. But again, we saw last year they won 100 plus games, and then the last game won to Texas, and they were behind the 8 ball right away. And the Rangers ended up winning that series and ultimately, of course, the World Series. So, but if you're an Orioles fan, there's a lot to look forward to this year. And having a horse like Corbin Burns, he's as good as advertised. This should be a good season for the Orioles.
What's your view on the state of the Nationals as we enter this season?
Story of the Nationals is it's better than it was previous years. 71 wins was, last year they had all the luck with pitching. And so 71 wins was kind of on the higher end of where they should have been. I didn't think they were going to, go low 60s. So in terms of this year, though, I think 2025 is when they're going to be in playoff contention. I still think, it's a little bit ahead of schedule. Cade Cavalli coming off Tommy John surgery. He won't be ready until the middle of the summer, which hurts a little bit. But the source of optimism, though, is that come the middle of the season, you're probably going to see James Wood, probably going to see Dylan Cruz come back, get called up. Trey Lipscomb is a name to keep in mind. He could get called up. I wouldn't be surprised if he came up in April also as well, based on the way third base is looking. So that's the thing to keep in mind, that the opening day roster is very far from what it's going to look like come July 4, let's say.
Who makes the opening day roster, Trey Lincecum or Luis Garcia?
I think both. Well, I think Luis Garcia is going to make the opening day roster. I don't think that Lipscomb is going to make it, but I can see him getting called up a few weeks in.
Who starts in center field, Jacob Young or Victor Robles?
I think Jacob Young. Mark Lerner had a tweet recently where he sort of checked in with the fans, and he mentioned that Jacob Young was one of his favorite players that he saw so far this spring. He's a really fun guy to watch, and I can see him quickly becoming a fan favorite.
Who's our Jamer Candelario of this season? Who's the one player we signed that's going to break out and bring us a few prospects by the trade deadline?
Probably Eddie Rosario, who the Nats signed in the middle of spring training. He won the NLCS MVP a few years ago for the Braves. He's a trusty veteran bat. And I mentioned the NLCS MVP because that's going to be something that teams are going to consider come the trade deadline because of his postseason experience. Joey Gallo as well could be a guy who fetches prospects for the Nats simply because he strikes out a lot, but he also hits homers. And if you're a team desperate for a guy with power touching off the bench, Joey Gallo could be that guy. So those are the two names I would start with.
A lot of the baseball farm system rankings have the Nats somewhere in the middle. Do you think they're a little bit underrated with Cade Cavalli coming back from Tommy John, Trey Lincecum not getting a lot of national attention, Dylan Lyle? We think about Wood and Cruz and some of those folks. Is the system right where it should be in the rankings, a little bit higher or a little bit lower?
Well, I'm going off what I'm reading, right, as well. But I do know that a lot of teams have a deeper farm system than the Nats. It's sort of it's top heavy. It's how I would describe the Nationals farm system. So I would say that being in the middle of the pack is probably the proper ranking.
Rank the pictures. You have Cade Cavalli coming back. In 2025, rank these 5 pitchers in order of your 1 through 5 starters. Cade Cavalli, Josiah Gray, Mackenzie Gore, Jackson Rutledge, and Jake Irvin. How do you rank those 5?
I go Gore number 1. I think he has ace-like stuff. The debate would really be Cavalli versus Gray. I think Gray is a frontline starter. It's sort of always, is he a number 2? Is he a number 3? I'll go Gray over Cavalli. And then the back end of between Rutledge and Irvin, I think that they are back end rotation guys, which is not an insult. So I'll go Irvin 4, Rutledge 5.
I have this weird feeling that Jake Irvin's going to be this diamond in the rough that we got here. I'm not saying he's going to go win a Cy Young, but I think this guy's going to be a mainstay in the roster for quite some time and throw a lot of innings, strike out a lot. He's a big guy. He's a big lower body. I just feel like that guy's going to be someone who's going to be sticking around for quite some time.
Yeah, I would say that he actually was the most pleasant surprise of 2023. His numbers, if you looked at his numbers, you would think, Tim, what are you talking about? But based upon preseason expectations, no one thought that he was going to be at all on the Nats, thought that he'd be in the minors. Not only does he come up, but he has solid performances. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm really excited to see how he turns out this year. And let's see, is he a guy that the Nats can count on to be in that rotation?
Final question. We're going to dabble a little bit in conspiracy theories. Juan Soto said he really enjoyed his time in Washington. Is Juan Soto coming back to Washington?
I don't think so. I do think he ultimately will sign with the Yankees at the end of the season. Um, but I talked about 2025 being when the Nats, I think, are going to be ready to be competitive. Also, Patrick Corbin off the books. This is his final year with that huge contract. Steven Strasburg's still on for 3 more years. That's a whole different conversation. I don't think it's something you can dismiss, but I have a feeling that Soto is going to be very well liked in New York, and I do think that's where he will stay.
The day they traded Juan Soto was a dark day in this household, and I have my Juan Soto jersey hanging up almost like a memorial in my office. I have an ounce of hope that, he's been to San Diego, he'll have been to New York. I think Boris made the wrong call in the sense that he was so well loved here, and I'm not entirely certain in any other market he's going to get that type of love unless he wins the World Series for the New York Yankees. And I just think that there's an ounce of hope that we're going to see some rumors and some conversations about Juan Soto coming back as a National.
Well, it's been a really rough off season for Scott Boras. A lot of his clients have not gotten the money that they thought, turned down deals early on, played brinksmanship. I said this at the time, and I stand by us as we see the market develop. I think Boras made a huge mistake for Soto. If that $400 million deal that the Nats reportedly offered him before they ended up deciding to trade him was real, I think it was a big mistake. I don't think Soto's going to get more than that. We'll see how it shakes out. But I think he did his client wrong. And if I were Scott Boras, I would have taken that deal. It's a lot of money for an outfielder, for someone who doesn't pitch, doesn't play a premium defensive position. And I think Soto's going to rue the day that he turned down that extension.
Would it be the greatest baseball coup in history if Soto comes back? Woods is a star as we anticipate. Mackenzie Gore turned into a frontline starter. Robert Hassel is a 5th or 6th batter. C.J. Abrams is an all-star shortstop. Would it be one of the greatest coups in baseball?
Yeah, definitely. Especially when, San Diego only got Soto for, a year and a half or whatever. Now, they did make the NLCS in that first half of the year. But, yeah, I mean, look at the state of San Diego right now is not too great, even in business sense. Look, they got broadcasting issues. Their owner, unfortunately, passed away. They had to ask for an emergency loan last year from, I believe, Major League Baseball. So I now don't even have Soto for 2024. So, yeah, it would certainly be in that conversation of one of the greatest coups. Yeah, but if I'm trying to think of an equivalent, I'm thinking that even in sports, like the Cowboys had a big trade where they got rid of Herschel Walker, but it's not like Herschel Walker then returned to the Cowboys. So I'm going to think about that, but definitely let's in the conversation.
Final question. My wife's side of the family roots a lot for the Yankees and the Mets. You touched a little bit on the Yankees. What's the state of baseball for the New York Mets out in Queens?
2024, not great. They admitted that they're going to have a rebuilding year, but overall, very, very good. Mets fans should be excited long term. They have a deep pocket owner in Steve Cohen who's committed to winning. The situation with the Wilpons was unfortunate because basically they were run like a mid-market team while playing in New York. Well, that's a brown equation not only for the Mets, but for baseball in general. A New York team should be, quote unquote, a New York team. And I don't know if they're going to add to the area also as well around Citi Field, sort of match with sort of in vogue in baseball, build up the area around that area. But Mets fans should be excited. But again, this season, probably not so much.
Tim, where can everybody find you online? Make a plug for all your podcasts, all your business ventures, your social media. Let people know where they can find you online.
Yeah, we'd love for you to subscribe to Nats Chat Podcast. That's NATSCHAT. Also, if you like the Braves, if you're from the South listening, 755 forever. 755 is in reference to Hank Aaron's career home run totals. And the websites for that is natschatpodcast.com and 755forever.com. That's where you can find more information.
Tim Shovers is taking his first major league at bat. What's his walk-up song?
Ooh, great question. I'm probably going to go with Club to Death from The Matrix. If you can recognize that's an intense, I would go with intense instrumental and try and psych out the pitcher. That's something I'm going with.
That's awesome. Tim, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. I could talk baseball for hours upon hours and dive into all of the details. Thank you for taking the time for doing it. I know it's a lot of work, and I hope we have you back on the show sometime soon.
We're lucky, and best of luck to Texas Tech this month.
Hopefully. big matchup against North Carolina State. I'm feeling confident. We got a great coach. We got a good team. We've just been plagued by injuries. And if we could get 2 of our guys back, I think we have a good chance to make a Sweet 16 run and maybe beyond.
I'll be pulling for it.
All right, brother. Hey, thank you so much for your time, Tim. Have a great day, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
And I just can't see the path before me. A melody cries out like a beacon.